In this presentation, we're going to focus on an enemy health system that will determine if an enemy object has taken enough damage to be destroyed from a scene. I'm going to focus on the interaction of a projectile object interacting with the enemy object and then tracking that based on damage taken. And I have a basic scenario set up here where I have a tank object, and if I right-click, I'm launching cannonballs into the environment. And what I want to do is I want to track if these cannonballs are hitting this enemy object here, my big red cube. I want to track the damage that's taken, and if I take so much damage, if I take too much damage, I want to destroy the object from the scene. And so I'll focus on that health system and that damage management system. And in order to do this, I'm not going to cover the concepts of creating the player and launching the projectile. I want to focus on the projectile itself and the interaction with the bad guy. And so I have a prefabs folder, and when I right-click inside my scene, my tank is spawning my cannonball object. My cannonball object is set up with a simple state machine. I have a one-state machine that is applying force to the cannonball. So when I right-click, it spawns the cannonball and launches it towards the direction that I'm pointing. I also have a bad guy in my scene, and my bad guy is just a big cube. I've applied a red material to it so that we can see it a little bit easier. And in order to get this system established, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by focusing on the bad guy. And I'll add a real simple state machine here. The first state that I'm going to create on my bad guy is going to be an idle state. So this state is just kind of sitting waiting for some kind of interaction. And the interaction that I'm waiting for is a cannon hit. So I'm going to create an event. And the event that I'm going to create is a cannon hit event. And I'll add that to my equation. Now, my cannon hit event, I want to make sure that this little checkbox that's next to this custom event that I just created is turned on. And what that does is that says that this is a global event, meaning that it can receive a broadcast from another state machine to trigger this event. So we're going to handle this a little bit different than we have in previous presentations. So I'm going to go back to my state, and in my idle state, I'm going to add this cannon hit transition. I'm going to add an additional state, and this will be the state once we get hit. Maybe we'll take some damage and do some other things. So I'll call this the take damage state. So when the cannon hit action or event is triggered, it sends it to this take damage. Now, the difference here is that in the idle state, I'm not going to have an action in this state that triggers the cannon hit event. This event has been set to a global event, which means that I'll send an event from a different machine to trigger this cannon hit event. And the thing that I'll use to trigger that event is my cannonball prefab. So inside my cannonball, what I want to do is on this state where I'm applying my force, I want to set up a system event. Now at this point, we've primarily focused on custom events. So typically when we create an event, we'll go into the Events tab, we'll create whatever custom event we want, and we add it, and then we'll go over and right-click and add any custom events that we have. In addition to custom events, we have used the finished system event, but there are other kinds of events that we can use. In my default cannonball state, I'm going to right-click and I'm going to choose to add a transition. I'm not going to add a custom event. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a system event, and inside the system events, I can choose collision enter. So basically my cannonball is going to travel through the environment, and when it collides with an object, it's going to trigger this custom event. This system event, this collision event. And so I'm going to add another state, and this state is going to be my collision state, where I'm going to pull out some information. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking in this state to get some collision info from this. So I think if I just type in collision, I'll be able to just sift through this really quickly. And I'm looking for get collision info. So it's under physics, and I want to get collision info. Now the collision info that I want to track here, there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's, game object hit, relative velocity, speed, and so on. And the thing I'm most interested in the information that I want to track is what object I've hit. And there's this game object hit, and I can store that in a variable. So I'm going to go to variables, and I already have a game object variable here. I'll just delete that and recreate this. I'll call this object hit, and I'll make sure that that is set to a game object, and I'll add that, and I'll go back to the state. So the game object hit, I'll store that in a variable. I'll then do a get object compare tag. So I can get object. I don't see it. Let's see. I'll do a compare tag. There it is, game object compare tag. So now I have these in the wrong order. I want to get the collision info first, store the object in the variable, because later down here in the game object compare tag, what I want to do is the game object that I want to compare the tag with is the thing that we just hit. So I'll set this to the variable. So this is the object that we just hit. We'll test for a tag. Now currently by default the tag is untagged, but if I go to my bad guy here, I have my bad guy tagged with enemy. Now enemy is a custom tag that I created. By default, any object that you create in Unity is going to come with an untagged state. If you want to create custom tags, you can just add tag and enter any additional tags that you want here. There are some tags that a default scene will come with. It'll come with things like player and a respawn and finish and so on. But I've added an enemy and a building tag. And so I'll tag my enemy object as an enemy. And because it has that enemy tag, when the cannonball, I'll go back to my prefab here. We have this collision event. It's going to enter, and we'll go over to this collision state. The collision state is going to capture the object that we've collided with and store that in a variable. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a game object compare tag. And I'll take the object that we've just hit, and we'll test it against a tag, and we'll just choose from this drop-down menu. If I choose enemy, basically what's going to happen is I could filter this enemy tag, whether it's true or not. So we hit something. If it's an enemy tag, we can send it off to a true event. If it's not, we can send it off to a false event, and then we can also store that. What I'll do is I'll create an enemy hit state. Enemy hit. And so in this collision, I'm also going to create an event, and I have an event here called an enemy hit, and I'll also just call this other hit. Let me make this a little bit, this enemy hit. Enemy is hit. And so on this collision, we'll do a transition of enemy is hit, or we'll do another is hit. And if an enemy has been hit, we'll pass it off to this enemy hit state. Now back in my collision state, we're filtering. We'll take the object, we'll test it to see if this tag, if it's tagged with enemy, and if so, if that's true, we'll send it off to this enemy hit state, which will feed it off to this this third state. In the enemy hit state, this is where we will fire off our bad guy cannon hit event. So I'll just go back to my prefab, I'll select my cannonball, I'll go to my enemy hit, and I can talk to this state machine. I can talk to the bad guy state machine, because remember, way back when I created this bad guy state machine, and I created this cannon hit event, if I go into events, remember I created a cannon hit event, and I checked it to say that it's global, which means that it can receive a broadcast from other state machines. And so now if I go into my prefabs and I go into the cannonball, and I go to my enemy hit state, if I do, I'll just cancel out my search here, and if I look in my state machine, I can do a send event. There it is, send event. And what I'll do is I'll send, the event target is not going to be myself, it's going to be a game object. And in fact, it's going to be the game object that we've stored in the variable object hit. So we can choose game object. We'll specify a game object rather than using the owner. And rather than dragging an object in here, we can load in that variable of object hit that we've detected here in the collision info. Okay, so we'll follow this logic through here once we get this whole thing wired up. So I'm in my enemy hit state. We're doing a send event to a game object. It's the object that our cannonball just ran into. Okay, and then the send event that we want to trigger, the event that we want to fire off. We have all these system events, but buried somewhere way in here, there should be a cannon. There it is, a cannon hit state. Cannon hit event. Okay, cannon hit. I can go and confirm that if I go back to my bad guy. I can look and see that there it is. There's my cannon hit event. That is going to be fired off when the cannonball hits it. And we can test this whole scenario out here in just a moment. Let me follow this logic through. So I'm looking at the prefab, and remember, my prefab is the thing that gets spawned if I hit my play button. When I right click over here, I'm spawning this prefab. Okay? This prefab will, when it collides with a rigid body, it's going to fire off this collision event. The collision event is then going to store the object that it's collided with. It's going to do a quick tag compare, and if it hits an object that's tagged with enemy, it's going to send it off to this enemy his. We don't want to say enemy his, is hit, and it'll fire off to this event called enemy hit. The enemy hit will then fire off this cannon hit event that we have on this bad guy. So we'll go back over here and talk to the bad guy. So if I test this, if I hit the play button and I watch this bad guy, if I hit it with a cannonball, I had a little glitch that I had to troubleshoot, and I want to troubleshoot offline. So when I was firing before, my idle hit, my take damage on my bad guy wasn't firing, and so I set up a couple different scenarios and tweaked a few things and was testing it, and it turns out that in my player object, my spawn point inside my cylinder, this is the location that I was instantiating the cannonball. My spawn point was actually back in the barrel of my cannon here, and so the result was when I was firing off my bullets, it was actually colliding with the turret and therefore storing that as the collision event. So I had a little bit of glitch. So the first thing my cannonball always hit when it was spawning was the first thing that it was spawning was, or excuse me, the first thing my cannonball was colliding with was always my cannon turret, or this cannon barrel. And you can see here that it's not triggering that bad guy hit event according to the logic the way that we set it up. But if I toggle that play button off, I go into my turret, grab my spawn point, and just move that out so I can ensure that when my cannonball spawns, it's not going to touch, it's not going to collide with this object, just as a quick fix. Now when I go back to my bad guy and set it up as the same scenario, I'm looking at the state machine and the bad guy. When I right click, now you can see that that first cannonball hits and it takes damage. So it fires off that action, it broadcasts that interaction. So again, if I go back to my cannonball object, I'll follow the logic here. So we have a cannonball object that's spawned, it has a rigid body on it, and the first state, its job is just to add force and send it off in a direction. We added a system event that listens for a collision enter. Once that collision's been entered, we send it off to a collision state. That state does two things. It gets the collision info, which we're storing the game object hit into a game object variable. In that same state, we take a look at the game object and we compare the tag. And then if we're hitting an enemy object, we want to pass it on to an enemy hit state. So we pass it on to another state. And this state is simply broadcasting an event. So it's going to do a send event, And we've decided to not broadcast that event to self, but we want to broadcast it to a game object. The game object we want to specify, and we want to specify it not by dragging in a game object into this field here, but earlier in a previous state, we've stored the object that we ran into in a variable called object hit. So in other words, we're going to broadcast to whatever object our cannonball ran into. That's the event that we're going to broadcast to, or that's the state machine, I should say, that we're going to broadcast to. And the broadcast, we're going to broadcast the send event as I've renamed my event to Troubleshoot. Where did it go? It's hiding in here. New hit. There it is. New hit. And again, that's whatever we've determined on our bad guy, whatever this event is here. We've created an event. We've named it. In this case, I called it new hit. I've made sure that it's checked so it receives a broadcast. It's a global event. It can receive a broadcast from other state machines. And so we're firing off that event. So currently, my bad guy state machine is doing nothing but idling until this new hit is broadcast. At that point, we have a take damage state. And in the next presentation, we'll start to manage hit points and start to reduce based on this taking damage. But we'll do that in the next presentation.